Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to tell you a little bit about my learnings from this book, having finished Grant by Ron Chernow. Now, if you're not exactly into history or warfare or politics, that's okay. It's not really going to be about that. It's going to be about extracting lessons on personal development and leadership, lessons that anybody can apply. So this book, it's about, just a quick summary, it's about uh, 900 pages or more. I read about 10 pages per night for several months. I really enjoyed it. I took a lot of notes. I plan on reviewing my notes later, and maybe I'll put out some a better summary of the book and some of my favorite parts. But in today's video, I just want to briefly summarize Grant and then give you my two biggest takeaways on his weaknesses and how we can think about those and how those issues might affect our own lives. But I also hope that you'll check out the book. So first of all, who was Grant? We're talking about the 1800s. He was the 18th president of the United States. He was president after Lincoln was assassinated. Andrew Johnson was in there as president, and then Grant took over as president. Um, Grant came from humble backgrounds, but he rose through the ranks of the Army, through the military, to eventually become the top general of the U.S. And then after that, he became a two-term president. He almost won a third term. He was immensely popular. He was regarded almost as as powerful and influential and effective a man as George Washington. He was accorded like the same rank, the same title as George Washington, which was before his time. It was sort of an unprecedented thing to do. Later in life, he became a world traveler and a writer. So, uh, first of all, some good things about him, just to briefly summarize the positive aspects of his personality, which he is known for. He was very humble, down to earth, a man of high integrity, very honest, very concise in his communications. In terms of his skills and abilities, there's also something there we can admire because he was a great family man. He loved his wife, loved his family. I think he had 4 children, 3 boys and 1 girl. But of course, he was also effective as a soldier and as a leader in the military. He was also obviously a politician, a president. After his presidency, he became something of a world traveler and a diplomat. He visited several countries. He established some new mores for what happens to presidents after they're president, and how to do negotiation and how to influence world events. And then finally, at the end of his life, he became a writer and an author and wrote his personal memoirs, which it was a massive work, widely celebrated, widely read. I may read that in the future. People didn't know that he had that in him as well. So a lot of positive attributes. Obviously, he guided the nation through the Civil War along with Lincoln, working in tandem. People believe that largely, they were two men who really worked together to save the Union. Abraham Lincoln as president, Ulysses S. Grant as a top military leader. It was a gruesome time. It was a dark chapter in American history, but that context, that dramatic context surrounding the rise of Grant makes understanding Grant's personality a really exciting proposition, and I highly recommend you examine his personality and his life, see what you can extract and apply. But what I want to talk about in today's video, and this is why I like to read biographies of great leaders, is because, well, number one, why am I drawn to the story in the first place is because there's something in the personal qualities of that leader that resonates with me, and I feel a kinship with them. I feel that I also have some of those qualities. That's the first thing that attracts me to read such stories. But then another thing that I make sure to do when I read the stories nowadays is extract lessons from their weaknesses or from their failures. Because, maybe if we have similar strengths, we also might have similar weaknesses, and I can use what I learn to avoid those problems in my own life. Now, there are two major takeaways from the story, two major, what I see as like character flaws or issues that Grant struggled with. And I want to share those with you and get into a discussion. And if you have more issues that you want to talk about or more aspects of Grant's personality that you want to talk about, you can leave them in the comment section down below. One of the things that I think Grant struggled with was his lack of appreciation for appearances, how he appeared to the public, and also maybe not adequately considering the rumor mill and his reputation. And there's two things that can highlight this issue. One is his actual physical dress, which is it's a both of these things we're going to talk about are very understandable when it comes to the appearances. But one was his dress. So he was very down to earth. He was from the Midwest. He dressed very plainly. Sometimes he was a little bit maybe unkempt in his appearance. And so that often led people to totally mistake who he even was, and they couldn't believe that this was the man that they had heard about. I mean, he just kind of looked like a poor tramp, just dressed in a very plain way with an old suit and maybe like a suitcase, showing up to Washington with very few belongings, trying to check into a hotel, and people were shocked and they couldn't even believe who he was. So this was one of the things, was that maybe he didn't dress up quite enough for certain occasions, and it led people to think he was poor or stupid. He also didn't like to speak a lot, whether publicly or in writing, especially in the earlier days. Like he was very concise, and he sort of eschewed or avoided talking a lot, especially in public settings. So that was another thing, taking this all together, people mistakenly, mistaked who he was, and they also tended to think that he was sort of poor, illiterate, dim-witted. And then the second thing we can look at with regards to this topic of appearances was his sort of binge drinking episodes. So he developed a reputation which haunted him throughout his life of being a drunkard. Even though he didn't drink regularly, he didn't drink often, and in much of his later years, he won this battle of not drinking anymore, and wherever he would go, he would turn his cup down. But here's the thing, and the author gives a great treatment in this book of how alcoholism works, how binge drinking works, and what's exactly going on there. And he makes the case that that Grant had problems with binge drinking under certain types of circumstances. So especially when he was alone, away from his family, who he loved so much, when he was stationed, for example, in remote military outposts away from his family and couldn't see family for an extended period, he was prone to depression. He was also prone to depression when he was inactive and he couldn't be actively pursuing, the jobs that he wanted, for example, in the military. So what would happen, especially throughout his military days, is when he was in times that were not very, when the action had died down, and he could catch a couple free days, maybe he would go off somewhere and go on a drinking spree, go on a bender, and sometimes be like found and brought back by a friend. So this happened, there was a scattered number of times where this happened. It was a way that he sort of relieved his depression, dealt with his depression, and dealt with his stress, and dealt with his loneliness, dealt with a feeling of inactivity, of boredom, of lethargy. But these few moments haunted him forever after. And I wonder if he had known how much that would play into his reputation in later years, would he have acted differently? I don't know. So public appearances, how the rumor mill functions, how a man's reputation from his earliest days can affect him for the rest of his life. I mean, people later, when he was in his 40s, 50s, when he was a top general or trying to become president or running for one office or another, guys, political opponents and old enemies, old friends were dredging up the oldest of stories. And that speaks to as well being in the public eye in general, or trying to be a leader or a teacher in general, or being an influencer. Those things are going to come up. So that's one major lesson that I took away. Again, that doesn't really shine too poorly on Grant, actually, but it's a little thing that I'm extrapolating and making bigger, magnifying it to examine how that all works. And then the second thing, which was arguably much worse and much more damaging to Grant and also to people around him, was that he was trusting to a fault, and he often misplaced his loyalty. So the concept of misplaced loyalty plays in big in this narrative, and I thought about this a lot because I have a tendency to be very trusting to people in my life too. So the interesting thing here was as a military leader, he obviously was anticipating the enemy at every turn and expecting the worst things that they would do. But that didn't really seem to translate to his political life, which I find very curious, and I would love to talk to an expert about why that skill didn't really translate into politics. He was such a newcomer to politics. He was really so naive about the political sphere. There was so much intrigue in Washington, and so many highly intelligent people who had been schooled in top universities and really traveled the world, and they were so cosmopolitan, and they were vying for power and vying for influence. And a lot of Grant's closest friends thought he was going to be unprepared for that. And if he went into that sphere, he was going to be tainted by that and dragged down into the mud. And that's what happened in a lot of ways as he attempted to forge himself as a politician. Was he got duped, he got tricked so many times in the political realm and also in the business realm. And the strange thing is he could never believe that he was being cheated by someone he trusted. Even when other friends would come out and say, he's cheating you, he's tricking you, he's double-crossed you, we can prove it, he would continue to defend that individual like to the end, to his own detriment. And I just found that utterly fascinating. And there's Grant's firsthand writing in there, being expressing this disbelief and this continuing disbelief that this could have happened. He was quite sincere in this disbelief. So we know at that point it's some sort of a character flaw, something he couldn't figure out. And I thought at first, maybe, maybe Grant was thinking in the same way I do about trusting people, which is, if I trust them and something goes wrong, the matter at hand is really so small that it's not going to create a big problem, and it can be handled easily. I can easily be the bigger man. The ramifications of any problem wouldn't be so large. So it's totally okay to throw in all my trust, because it doesn't really matter what happens one way or the other. I can handle whatever comes. But I think that's not the case with Grant, because he got into situations where he had so much power, so much authority, so much responsibility, that to give a full amount of trust to somebody and not expect or fathom that they could do wrong could create very serious negative consequences for a lot of people, for his family, for his friends, for the political institutions, for the public. So in that regards, to be so trusting and to be so naive that he would think no one could possibly double cross him or not have his best interests in mind, obviously became a serious problem and something of a character flaw. So these are the two major lessons that I came away with. Consider the issue of appearances and rumors. Obviously, it shouldn't be the governing force in what you do. It wasn't with Grant, but you might want to consider it enough so that you don't do things that would haunt you for the rest of your life. And second, don't misplace your loyalty. Don't trust everyone 100% without any sort of caveats or qualifiers to that, especially in matters of great importance, which could have serious repercussions. Now, I'd like to conclude the video by reading something that Walt Whitman wrote about Grant. It's one of the first pages in the book, and I think it's a really beautiful passage, and I just want to conclude on a positive and beautiful note. So here's Walt Whitman writing about Grant. What a man he is, what a history, what an illustration, his life, of the capacities of that American individuality common to us all. Cynical critics are wondering what the people can see in Grant to make such a hubbub about. They aver that he has hardly the average of our day's literary and scholastic culture, and absolutely no pronounced genius or conventional eminence of any sort. Correct. But he proves how an average Western farmer, mechanic, boatman, carried by tides of circumstances, perhaps caprices, into a position of incredible military or civil responsibilities, may steer his way fitly and steadily through them all, carrying the country and himself with credit year after year, command over 1 million armed men, fight more than 50 pitched battles, rule for 8 years a land larger than all the kingdoms of Europe combined, and then, retiring quietly with a cigar in his mouth, make the promenade of the whole world through its courts and coteries and kings and czars and mikados, as phlegmatically as he ever walked the portico of a Missouri hotel after dinner. Seems to me it transcends Plutarch. How those old Greeks indeed would have seized on him, a mere plain man, no art, no poetry, a common trader, moneymaker, tanner, farmer of Illinois, general for the Republic in the war of attempted secession, president following. A task of peace more difficult than the war itself. Nothing heroic, as the authorities put it, and yet the greatest hero. The gods, the destinies, seem to have concentrated upon him.